Hi everybody, my friends got together and bought me this Rover 100 track car in secret. To celebrate, I booked a private track day at Blyton Park and invited you to come along. And the legends that you are, you sold it out in 12 hours. I was worried we weren't going to have enough people. So much is the demand, I have now booked a second date at Blyton for November the 3rd, giving you a little bit more time to get ready. So, if you'd like to join me, my friends, and the mighty Metro at Blyton for a little bit of fun, please follow the link in the description down below or send me an email. Make sure your insurance doesn't come up short. Get gap cover with ALA. For more information, follow the links in the description. Hello everybody, you join me for a typical summer's day here in the north of England. And in this video, a bit of an update on one of my favourite members of the fleet, but a car that you don't tend to see all that much of. This, my 1996 Toyota Celica GT4. I've owned the Celica now for longer than any other car in my life. 7 years, believe it or not. I bought this to celebrate 25,000 subscribers on the channel, and I'm very happy to say that we've come a long way since then. And the Celica GT4 has always been a bit of a childhood hero of mine. Blame Sega Rally. But perhaps because I knew it was going to stay around forever, progress hasn't always been as swift as I would have liked. COVID did get in the way. In the early days there were budgetary constraints as well, but in the last 18 months things have moved on nicely, and I've managed to fix a whole bunch of things that have been bugging me for over half a decade now. Now, in previous videos you will have seen the fact that we did give the car a full respray in its correct factory 040 white. Looks marvellous, doesn't it? I'm normally not one for white cars, but when it comes to stuff like this, I think it's the only choice. Although, help me out here, I'm still unsure whether to give it the Castrol livery. Answers on a postcard, or even better, in the comment section down below. Now, I did actually have fairly grand plans to do quite a bit with this car last year. However, it wound up being pressed into service last minute as the JayEmm & Friends courtesy car, when Ant had a bit of an issue with his 370Z. More on that coming soon on his Sports and Touring channel. However, that opportunity proved to me that this car really was in much better fettle than I believed. I think because it was in just such a generally cosmetically poor state in the early days, with a few mechanical issues, I still struggle with the concept of this being a car that I can just get in, drive and use. However, now I have done a few more miles myself, and in the last 12 months we've solved quite a few issues. Ant very kindly, to thank me for lending him the car, got my alloys refurbed, also in white, because if you're going to commit to the cause, do it properly. He also sorted the badging on it, and this is much trickier than you would imagine. Some of these items are now unobtainium. The rear Toyota badge on the car, which just fell off because I'd attached it with blue tack, I had to get that from Australia, and that was only because it was cheaper buying it from there than the United States. Australia, it only cost me £100. The guy in the USA wanted over 200. We've also put the Celica and the GT4 badging on the back in the correct Japanese orientation. We've got a new Toyota badge on the front and even a TRD badge, though frustratingly, when I cleaned it recently, a bit of the red popped off, and so I need to reattach that, but make sure it stays on. In terms of the interior, things are largely as they always were, aside from the fact they're much cleaner than normal, thanks to Ben the Sparkle, who recently paid me a bit of a visit. I've got a new TRD gear knob on. That was much more difficult to fit than it should have been because a previous owner butchered it to put on a Mishimoto one, which I didn't hate, but also just thought wasn't quite right for the car. I also fixed one of my biggest issues with this, which is the fact that, again, someone in the past had fitted the thing with blue LED lights for the dash, half of which no longer worked. So at night, I didn't know how fast I was going, how much fuel I had, or just about anything else important. I had half of the rev counter illuminated, and that was it. Unless I went over a bump, in which case some of the rest of it would illuminate for a little bit and then go away. That now has been solved and was actually really quite easy. We've also fitted a new exhaust, a Fujitsu rear section and a new TB Dev one at the front with a better cat than the one fitted by MK previously. Unfortunately though, this is still proving problematic. The GT4 is notorious for having a very difficult path for its exhaust, and both the TB dev bit and the Fujitsu element are a bit larger than standard, and it's contacting on the chassis at various points and times, making it really quite annoying to sit on the motorway in. This, I'm sure, can be solved, potentially with the application of a hammer, and if you think you could help me with that particular problem, then please do write in below as before. We have also had the car on a rolling road and given it a proper map. It now makes 310 horsepower. We did get it up to 315, but they dialed it back to keep it safe. And that was all done by the good people at Hybrid Tune down in Suffolk. Very, very nice chaps all round. And so the car is edging ever closer to perfection. I've even finally managed to solve, or start to solve, another one of the big problems that I've got with it, which is the fact that, again, before I got it, somebody decided to remove the aircon. And believe it or not, a couple of days ago here in Britain, it was over 30 degrees. And of course, when it's that hot and you got a car without aircon, you're not going to want to use it. And that's another reason I just haven't driven this car all that much. I was fearful for quite some time of whether I could even get the parts for the aircon and how much they'd cost, but it turns out I managed to find a chap on Facebook breaking a car who sold me most of the bits I need for this for about 220 quid. Now, on top of that, it is likely going to cost me about another £1,000 or so to get the parts that I'm still missing. However, with luck, this year, I'll have a Celica with aircon. Another thing previously removed is much of the stereo in here. So the car has no front speakers whatsoever, just some in the rear and a very old school head unit. I've bought an even older school head unit, complete with a mini disc in it to go in the car and complete that 90s period look. And refitting a good sound system to this is going to be something that I'll be doing with my good buddy Will, aka Will the Plank from our Radiator Arms podcast, and that may be a winter project for us. However, this is a now almost 30-year-old Japanese car, and when it comes to cars like this, there is one thing people will always talk about: rust. Now, I know this car does have a bit of surface corrosion underneath, and in the grand scheme of things, it's actually not that bad. And I'd really like to keep it that way and do what I can to make sure the car is protected for the next 30 years or so. And that's why I've come here to Arctic Garage in Knutsford, just outside Manchester, for those who don't know the area. I've been invited by the owner, the lovely Matthew, who is going to show me what ice blasting is all about and to give this car the treatment, thereby preserving it for at least a while yet. Goodie. So that's the car on the ramp, and to be honest, no real surprises. It's crustier in some places than others, but as you'd expect for a 30-odd-year-old Japanese car, which has been relatively well maintained over its life. There's a few suspension components and things that maybe I will ultimately need to replace, but the big ticket items like the subframe and things like that aren't in horrendous condition, and hopefully dry ice will be able to do its magic. And how exactly does that work? So, here we have the dry ice. Lots of it in 3mm pellet form. And in case you're wondering, there's not really anything particularly special about it. You're, I'm sure, already familiar with dry ice. If ever you've been to a nightclub in the 90s or noughties, you'll have seen it. Heck, even my local Indian uses it for a bit of tabletop theatre. But how does this help that? The answer is science. Dry ice is simply frozen carbon dioxide, kept solid by being stored at a chilly -78 degrees Celsius, a temperature so cold that even a lady from Newcastle might think about putting on a jacket. That is then loaded into a special gun, powered by this, a very large compressor, which helps fire the dry ice at the bodywork at very high velocity. And when it contacts, two things happen. First, because of the extreme temperature, whatever it touches turns very brittle. Secondly, the process of sublimation then occurs, where the carbon dioxide turns instantly from a solid back into a gas. And when that happens, it lifts the then brittle contaminants on the surface of your metalwork and other components and lifts them off of the car. And the very nature of the process brings with it a couple of key benefits. First off, unlike traditional media blasting, where you might fire something like sand at your components, it is far less aggressive, meaning you don't have to be quite so worried about prepping things, though you still of course got to take care, and it means you can do a lot more in situ. And because what you're doing is firing a frozen gas at the car, there is relatively little in terms of byproduct. In fact, the only waste you really have to deal with is that which came off the car itself. So, time then for me to get suited up and to join Matt in the chamber and show you what it looks like. Well, it's going very well indeed. I have to say, I'm really impressed at how much that is lifting off. Now, Matt did also used to do laser rust treatment, which is a little bit more aggressive and potentially a bit more effective as well. This, technically speaking, is just a very, very thorough clean. However, the laser does bring with it a fair few risks as well, and it's nowhere near as cost effective as this, to the point that often he'd find himself recommending to customers just to replace the parts they were talking about as opposed to getting them laser treated. Dry ice strikes a really nice balance. Now he's going to be in there for another couple of hours getting the car all prepped and ready before then we can apply the rust treatment. So I'm going to leave him to it and we'll rejoin him shortly. So, day 2. The cleaning process has now been completed and the results are remarkable. No, it's not immaculate, but the car now looks a good 10 years younger under here. And there are still signs of plenty of the factory rust protection in place and doing its job. And there is absolutely no need whatsoever to remove that. It's there for a purpose. Over the years, other owners have also applied their own, and some of that has now been removed. The next step for Matt is to apply a rust inhibitor, and this will stop any existing corrosion in its tracks. After that, a rust preventer will be applied, coating all of the vulnerable components on the underside of the car and making sure that should I ever get caught in the salt, the wet or anything like that, this should be safe and I will be able to sleep easy at night. So there we have it, all done, and she's now coming off the ramp, ready for me to drive and enjoy once again. And look, here's the thing, this is not a particularly cheap process. If you want the full works, as I've had done with the ice blasting and also the rust treatment afterwards, you're looking at about £3,000. But remember, this is a very labour-intensive process involving specialist tools and materials. And for me, I think it's an investment well worth it, particularly if you've got something like this, which you intend to keep for a long time, then it's just another added bit of peace of mind. More than that, if you are thinking of selling your car in the near future, which I'm not with this, then it should also add a little bit of value to the car for your potential next buyer. And it's not just 30-year-old Japanese cars that you need to be worried about. Even things like this, my buddy Chris's 987 Boxster, well, they're beginning to corrode too. People don't really talk about it, but ask anybody in the Porsche world and they'll tell you 996s, 997s, and the 986 and 987, they can and will corrode. And with this, maybe you wouldn't need the full ice blasting, but getting a good bit of proper underbody protection on it can be a well worthwhile investment. And that costs nowhere near as much. You're looking at more like £800 for a full underbody treatment with all the nice high-end Dinitrol. More than that, you'll often find that some manufacturers do scrimp in certain areas when it comes to protecting their cars. And with people like Matt, you can protect not just the bits you can see, but also the bits you can't. And very often you'll find it's the pieces of the car that aren't visible to the naked eye, which can be where the rust starts, in cavities and things like that. And it's why we've had all of those sealed up here too. And so, if you'd like to know a little bit more about the process, or perhaps get your car booked in for the best price and service, don't forget to call Matt here at Arctic Garage. Naturally, I'll put all of his details in the description down below. But for now, I wish to say a big thank you to him for having me up here, looking after my car, and to you for watching. Bye-bye.